I'm Dr. Yomi Adeyemi. I'm a family medicine intern at Charles Drew University, and this is my photo voice reflection. So last week, after seeing our first patients at the MLK Outpatient Center, I talked to a few co-interns about going out into the local community and visiting Watts Towers. Watts Towers are these historic towers built by this very eclectic architect named Simon Rodia. The story goes that he built this site using donated parts and built it pretty much on his own over a number of years. I thought it was an interesting story, and I thought it'd be fun to just go out there and see what the towers look like. So my co-interns and I went out to the site, and when you're driving up to the site, it's the sort of thing where you don't see it. You're kind of looking around, and then finally you're there at the site. There's no, it's not like a park or anything where, you kind of know where you're headed. We get there and there are some interesting statues, including one of Simon Rodia that I tried to take some nice pictures of, and some plaques that sort of describe who he was and how he constructed the towers. And the towers themselves are some of the most interesting pieces of architectural design that I've ever seen. They are, very artistic. They certainly bear the marking of, I think, to me, what looks like some artistic genius. But I could definitely see the eclectic aspect of Mr. Rodia in his construction. And so visiting the site, it was really interesting. While we were there, we noticed there were almost a dozen people gathered around. We could see as we walked around that a few of them were at a table, and they had headphones on, and on the table they had ring lights and a bunch of cell phones. And as we got closer, we kind of could hear that they were talking to each other. And one of my co-interns approached some of the gentlemen who were standing around the table, and they found out that these guys who were gathered were actually recording a live stream podcast. The gentleman who they were talking to, I later talked to him. He goes by Kiki Smooth on social media. Shout out to Kiki Smooth. And this podcast that they do it every Wednesday. They call it High at the Towers, a little tongue in cheek. But the idea of this podcast is that they bring on talented local artists, rappers, that sort of thing, to show their talent and to talk, and while we were there, they were talking about all sorts of things, talking about philosophy, talking about life, talking about their art and music. They talked about how they would put on this podcast and help promote local talent and help connect different people. We had a great time just hanging out with them briefly and seeing what their podcast was all about. And later on, when I was sort of reviewing the pictures and the videos that we took, it hit me that really what we'd seen there was relevant on a few different levels. One of the things that Kiki Smooth talked about was how during the pandemic, they had to adjust. Obviously, with restrictions on being on large crowds gathering indoors, they couldn't do their podcasts indoors anymore. And so this was actually the reason why they shifted to doing outdoor. He talked about the fact that they were just kind of glad that they had that space. And that to me was actually the biggest thing that kind of struck me. Because while we were driving out to that site, like I mentioned, the thing to me that was like, you couldn't see where we were headed. You couldn't see that here's a park, like Watts Towers Park or something like that, and then within it these towers. It was just kind of like the towers, the site, that was it. And that's sort of a theme in the Watts-Willowbrook community. There isn't a lot of green space. There really isn't. And to me, seeing that the little space, the little public space that was available was able to facilitate that level of sort of community activity, it hinted to me the massive potential that might be going just totally unexplored and unused because of the fact that there is so little public space, that there are so few parks. There isn't, to me, a substitute for being able to offer places for people to gather together. To me, that's where community sort of is formed. And so the lack of that public space, I think, it has huge implications. Yeah. Yeah. So those are my thoughts. I've really enjoyed this project. I enjoy the art of photography and videography, and this project was a really nice creative outlet. And I think I'm gonna continue to make photos and videos like this in the future. I made a hashtag on social media, hashtag CDU photo voice, for anyone who wants to follow what I post in the future. Be well, everyone. Thanks.